Hey there YouTube, Doc's Motorcycle Service. Rawr. Welcome back to the garage. We are into September and fall is upon us. Lord, the temperature outside is beautiful. The humidity is perfect. It's just that perfect time of the year when you don't need heat and you don't need AC. Real quick, check out the Facebook page. Starting to get some activity over there, a little bit more activity. Got some lights going on. So make sure you swing by there and check that out as well. So we are going to, if you watched the last video, I may have left you a little confused about when we were going to finish up the wiring harness series on Hot Donna. And the reason I say that is because, like I said toward the end of that video, these things are a puzzle. You can take them apart any way you want to take them apart, and you can put them back together any way you want to put them back together, but there's a right way and a better way. And if you do it the better way, then you're not going to be re-loosening and taking off as many things as you might normally have to take off and put on. And it occurred to me after we made that video that it's going to be a lot easier to work on the rear fender of this motorcycle with the tire out of the way, aka off the bike like it is right now. I know from previous experience that it doesn't matter how high you jack that back end of Donna up to get that rear wheel off the ground, with it being a soft tail, it's only going to pivot down so far without having to adjust the shocks. And nobody really wants to do that once you get the shocks adjusted in. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a future video when we get to that. It's just going to be a lot easier to place the fender on the motorcycle and then run the wires to the into the fender and to the lights while we're at it. Now, I'm going to offer you a couple of tech tips here right off the bat. The first one might be a mental tip. Tech tip. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better. Let me say that again. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better. We're not building custom motorcycles here. We're not working on show quality motorcycles. You might think your bike's worth being in show. Hey, it might be. I don't know. I ain't seen your motorcycle. But my point of this is, you can get so absorbed with making it perfect that it slows things down, and then when it isn't perfect, you have to come back and try to make it perfect again. That you get sidetracked. You go down the rabbit hole. And once you go down that rabbit hole, brother, any of y'all play golf? You ever try to find a ball in the weeds? You ever try to get it out of a sand trap? You're going to be there a little while. And the same thing happens on projects. If you go down the rabbit hole, if you go off into the weeds, and you're not careful, you can get sidetracked. And it'll throw you way behind. Now, with that said, we have had some sidebar videos here that I thought would be educational for the viewers, for you, to help you better understand how some things work in case you want to do them on your motorcycle. Remember, the goal of Doc's Motorcycle Service is two things. It's one, to help you have a sense of accomplishment by doing something on your motorcycle, and two, to save you some money. Okay, so before we go down the rabbit hole, I heard you say that he's off in the weeds again. Let's talk about what we're going to be doing to the fender and getting it wired into Hot Donna. If you remember back looking at this piece of paper, I'll put it up on the screen there so you can look at it. But if you remember looking at it, it talked about the rear loom having the left turn signal and the right turn signal and the tail light and the running light already pre-wired in that. The way this thing is set up with the terminal block, remember we talked about that, you have the turn signals that split, and the green wire gives power to both the left and the right coming into the block, in the terminal block, in a 4-block section. So you have 4 blocks, 1 wire brings power in, and it provides power to the other 3. Well, if the left turn signal wire coming from the flasher plugs into one of those, well, then you have a wire that can run forward to the left turn signal, and you can have a wire that comes out of it and goes to the rear left turn signal. Make sense? Okay, well, this Pro 1 wiring harness has bypassed all that. It's basically giving you a loom to run all the way to the back of the motorcycle. And we're going to delve into that here in a minute, and we're going to decide whether or not we want to use those wires or if we want to go with the original equipment specification and run a wire out of the terminal block back to those lights. Right now, holding this piece of paper in my hand, I don't know which way we're going to go with that, but we're going to look at the fender and we're going to look at the lights that's on it and start down that rabbit hole. So let's dive into that rabbit hole. So as I mentioned, here's the rear loom with all these wires on it. 4 of these wires are designed to go to the rear fender. We can run this wiring harness through here over the battery, and somewhere right in here open it up and pull the wires out for, oh, what were they? The coil wire, the rear brake switch wire, the neutral safety switch wire, the ignition control wires, what have you. And then we can continue this loop on back into here and into the fender. Now here's our fender, and it's going to be really hard for me to get this thing situated in the fender without Linda here. And we are going to go down a rabbit hole here too. So we're going to do this as a sidebar video, but the wiring is still going to be the same. This is a Drag Specialty 8 1/4 inch turn signal mount, and it's designed for the 86 through 17 FLST and FLSTC customs. It takes the place of your existing light bar, and what that does is it brings in those tail lights and turn signal lights, brings them in about 2 inches. So you don't have this big wide profile on the back of this. Today what we want to do is look at what's going on under here. Well, I'm working against the light here. I'm working against the sunlight. So I'm hoping you can see what is going on in here. Down here is the wire that comes to the fender tip. Just like the front fender tip light on Donna, it comes on whenever you turn the ignition on. We have a wire coming from each side that has 2 wires, and then it just all comes in right here, and it looks like it all went forward to these wires here. What we need to do is figure out what those are and how they're going to be. You're probably looking at this and saying, that looks kind of messy. You know what? It kind of does look messy, but at the same time, it's working. So what I need to figure out here is whether or not we're going to go back with that wiring setup, bring it up here to the top, right up here where it connects to the old wiring harness, or if we're just going to completely rewire everything. What we're going to do is we're going to get it loosened up and get it off there and take a look at it. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind whenever you're working on a project like this is the route of the wires. You'll notice down here the fender tip light has a little holder right here to keep everything in here flush. And you also have a holder up here at the top, and your main wiring harness has these clips that run on the side of the fender. Now, they were designed that way so that when you put the right size tire on here, your tire can go up in here and not rub those wires. And as long, especially with a Heritage Softail, as long as you're running the shocks at the right adjustment, the fender will never bottom out and the top of the tire hit those wires. Well, we're talking about this fender and we're talking about clearance. Keep in mind, a Heritage Softail, the reason they call it a Softail is because the frame is not rigid. From the neck, where the forks mount, down to the back end of the bike where the swing arm comes in, and the shocks lay underneath it. You'll see this further along in another video when we get the swing arm put in. But back in the old days, there was a rigid frame. From where the rear tire went in to where the forks went up front, it was one piece. Rigid, strong, back braking. So when they came out with the soft tail, they basically cut off the back end where the rear wheel mounted and put it on a pivot point. But your shocks are what keeps it pivoting, or gives you that little flex in there to help you have a better ride. You can run the shocks all the way out, lowering the center of the bike, and if they hit the bump stops, you're going to have a very hard ride. Or you can shorten the shocks up and it'll raise the bike up. It's really a good idea, especially when you have multi-height riders. You're a little guy or a little gal riding a motorcycle and you want your feet flat on the ground, you can drop them shocks way down and lower that thing down a little bit, but you're going to sacrifice a ride. If you're a tall guy and you feel like you're sitting too low, you can run them shocks in and it'll pull the center of the bike up and give you a higher ride. It's all about your riding style. But let's get back to the Fender. Well, I guess we could call this a tech tip. Sometimes you get a mental block. You just can't figure out how something is going to go together. And then I remembered after sitting there looking at it on the table for so long that I mentioned mounting the Fender to get a better idea of how I wanted to do this. And I put it on here and I just got it mocked up, just got the bolts pushed in on it. And ta-da! It occurred to me how I wanted to do this. Sometimes, and you can call that a tech tip. But sometimes you got to put it together. Remember, I told you it's like a puzzle. Sometimes you got to put it together to understand how you want it to go together and why you want it to go together. Again, for example, here's the wire. It came across here unoriginal and then plugged into the terminal block here. Here is the rear loom that we talked about at the beginning of the video, and it will come back here, and if it crosses over here, well, guess what? The wires here are not long enough to go back here and take care of this in one piece. Now, I told you this before. I hate electrical work. I hate it. I hate the word hate. I think hate is a very powerful word, and I don't attach it to a lot of things. But when it comes to electrical work, wiring work, I hate electrical wiring. The moment I got this on here, I realized how I want to do it. Another tech tip about electrical wire. Every time you splice a wire together, you're going to lose a little bit of connectivity, a little bit of something. You're going to lose a little bit of power there. So I know that if I use this harness and go back through here and tie it in back here, well, not only am I going to have a big wad of connectors back there in an area that I really don't have a lot of space to deal with anyway, I'm going to have to reattach them to the wires already existing that go to the brake light and the turn signals and everything that's back there. So what I've decided to do, now you may decide to do this, you may not. Again, this is all about what you do and what you feel comfortable doing, but the only way that you're ever going to get comfortable doing something, guess what? Say it with me, is to do it. Doesn't matter if it turns out wrong the first time, you at least tried. I know that's cliche, whatever, but the only way you're ever going to figure out how something works is to take it apart. The only way you're ever going to figure out how to fix it is to try to fix it. If you don't get it fixed the first time, try again. Ask some questions. I've said this before. Get on some Facebook groups. Ask some questions. You'd be surprised how willing people are to help you if you're genuinely interested in learning. People will go out of their way to help you. So what I'm going to do, I'm 99.9% sure right now, I'm going to run it by Linda when Linda gets here. Because remember, Linda's the voice of reason. I'm going to I'm going to cut off these wires that have anything to do with the wiring harness. And I don't know how I'm going to do that. I think what I'm going to do is just take this rubber sleeve off here, and I'm going to bring these wires that I'm not going to use up here, and I'm going to cut them off and put something on them to keep them from shorting out. I'm going to run the engine wires down to right here, and then I'm going to take these assemblies apart and I'm going to completely rewire them with one piece of wire that comes from the assembly all the way up through the fender up here to the terminal block. That way we got one wire, nice and smooth, no connections to break, no connections to fall apart, no big wad of connectors in one spot where you don't have anything to do at. So that's what I'm going to do. Keep in mind, it's going to have a different turn signal bar on it when you see it again, but that's going to be a sidebar video. Stop! Okay, real quick timeout. I shot this after the fact, after I got the video edited, and I left out something important I wanted to give you here. You can call this a tech tip or pro tip, whatever you want to call it, but keep in mind that this wiring harness goes all the way up here to the dashboard. It's one continuous wire. If you ran it down through here however you wanted to, and then you put it in here and you ran it down to the wires over here, one thing that you want to keep in mind is your connections that would connect to this wire down here would be exposed to the elements. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you get 4 or 5 or 6 of these wires together with male and female connectors on them, that's going to create a big wad. And you want this, you want the clearance underneath this fender for the tire. You really want a nice clean profile under there. The other side of it is you might say to yourself, well, I ain't going to use no body on connectors. I'm just going to solder these joints together and be done with it. Well, you know, that's a good idea, and I agree with that. But here's something to think about. If you ever needed to take this fender off for whatever reason, now these wires are soldered to the wires that goes to your lamps on the rear end. There's no way to unplug them. So I've already mentioned, I haven't mentioned it yet, but I'll go ahead and tell you now, one of the reasons I'm not going to use this is because of that. Because I know down the road there are plans to replace this fender, and it'll be a lot easier just to run the wires from the assemblies up through their own separate loom and then plug them into the terminal block here. That way, if you have to take the fender off, well, guess what? You pull the seat off, you unplug the wires from your terminal block for the rear fender, you pop out the 4 bolts, and ta-da, you can take the fender off. All right, back to the program. So the lighting is sucking today in the garage, but as you can see, we've got the smaller light bar mounted on here now. I mean, you can see from right there, this thing is covering up almost 2/3 of the lights that used to be out here on the end. We're making some headway here. We've got our Fender Tip Light, and the Fender Tip, interestingly enough, did not ground to the frame. It had a separate grounding wire that was originally on one of these 2 bolts here. So all things considered, if you don't have proper ground on your motorcycle, your lighting's not going to work. With the powder coating of the frame and everything that we were doing, since this Fender Tip Light on the back of the fender here, we're looking at the inside, I already had a ground wire coming from it. What I decided to do was to bring that up here through the loop, and then right here actually run it through a loop connector. You can't really see it well here, but you may be able to see it well there where it goes in this loop connector and then comes back out. Now what I'll do with this wire is I'll run this wire directly to the battery as a good ground. So by doing so, we have a good ground at the Fender Tip Light, we have a good ground for the turn signal bar, and we have a good ground for the brake light running light assembly up here. Now the plan is to, and you can see how I've got all these tied in here just with solder joints. Remember, tech tip, don't put all your your soldered joints together. And what I mean by that is, if they were all the same length and you had all of these joints right here at the same spot, that would create a very thick mass running through the loom that we're going to run to the front. So stagger your wires so that your joints are like here and there. You can see these other ones. This one is up here, and it's staggered off of that one right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue wiring this. We have the right side and the right side turn signal and the right side running light. We're going to go ahead and get those wires stretched in here. So what we've done is we've used some pieces of shrink wrap to really make this area tidy. We used a smaller piece down here to, I guess you might say, protect or encapsulate these two wires, and then we broke it. We used a smaller piece here to keep the Fender Tip Light snug to the ground wire as it jumps from this bolt over to here. We used a couple smaller pieces to keep these tight, and we've got a piece right here that we're using to keep these tight. And what we're going to do now is we're going to run a piece of 1/2 inch over all of the wires and then down onto here and shrink it. That way it's nice and neat. But more importantly, it's out of the way for the tire to have the proper clearance in here that it needs. Real quick, before I button all this up, I wanted you to take a look at this and see what I was talking about with those soldered joints. As you can see, we have a joint here, one here, one here, one here, and one there. And you can see that these wires where there's no joints pinched together, they're about 3/8. Well, looky here. These are about 3/8 too, 3/8 right there, about 3/8 there, and 3/8 there. Had we cut these particular wires all the same length and tried to put all these joints together in the same spot, it wouldn't have been 3/8. It would have been large, bulky, and hard to get the shrink wrap over. Here is a classic example of where you want your wires to the same length. Because if these wires were different lengths here, you would have wire shooting out that was too long and what have you. So two classic examples, one where you want your wires cut to the same length and one where you don't. There it is, coming through here. I guess hindsight being 20/20, me just being the way I am, I probably should have put some shrink wrap over that just to protect it, but I noticed it too late. And so we're coming in here with a ground wire there, and then everybody tucks in here and then just runs right up the side of the fender there. We got a lot left up here that we're going to be able to use. Don't worry about having excess wire on the end that you're going to cut. All right, and wire doesn't cost a whole lot. It's better to have this much left over at the end of the job than there is to need this much and only have this much, and now you're SOL. You miscalculated, you mismeasured. So now you've got to go through the process of opening up every one of those heat shrinks. And by God, trust me when I tell you this, if you cut one short, it's going to be the first one on the bottom that you put in, and you're going to have to redo all that way. Some people may disagree with this, but allow yourself 12 inches on the end that you're going to have the space. When we get this fender put in here, and then we get the oil tank in here and the battery in the oil tank, that is the point where we're going to know how long these wires coming from the fender need to be. They're coming up this side of Donna and run up to the side of the terminal block and then lay in here somewhere. There may not be enough room to have them lay across. They may need to run right in front and then go way up here. They may have to come across the back here and run up here and plug in. Or they may have to be tucked under here and run all this and plugged in here. So allow yourself about a good 12 inches when you're cutting stuff to go somewhere. Wire's cheap. It's a lot less time consuming to cut off more than you need. And I've then told you how I feel about splicing wire. The longer one piece you can get, the better. So now we're going to take a small break, and we're going to get the fender mocked up on the back of Donna, and then we're going to see how all this is going to lay together. So stick around, YouTube. Got her on here mocked up. Got it coming right under here, flowing under here, passing up beside this. That we can put this in here with a couple of wire ties and keep it out of the way. And we've got the negative ground wire right here. Now, so probably what's going to happen, in all honesty, probably going to come back to about right here and strip off this heat shrink, and so I can pull this coil wire or this ground wire out and either mount it here to the frame or have it available to go on the battery once the battery's in there. And then just for the neatness of it, once I get all of these figured out how they're going to lay in here and trimmed up and new ends on them, I will probably put another piece of heat shrink back on here, a short piece, down to about right here where the ground wire comes out at. And so that's all nice and neat. Ran this up here, brought it right here, and now what we're going to do is take these wires and run them over to the terminal block. But it's just not as simple as taking like this blue wire and running it across and then the green wire. You want to think about how you're going to do this so you can get the lowest possible profile laying here under the seat. Remember, we want to try to use as much available space. So what I'm going to do is looking here at the wiring harness, the brown wire is coming out on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it under here and under here, and it's going to go in this hole down here that you can't see. You can see it right there at my fingertip, that open brown hole. And basically I'm going to run it through here, turn it down, mark it, leaving enough room on the end for it to make that turn and go down into the terminal block. Put the end on it, stick it in there, and we'll go up through the wires from where they come out of the loom bottom to top, and then lay them across here, or run them through here, or run them around the back side. And we're going to get at it. We're very close to being done with this. Stick around, YouTube. One thing I forgot to mention, the oil tank has not come back yet. So we mocked up using 2x4 and spacers to get the battery where it will pretty closely be, and that helped us with the wiring. So as you can see, it's in there and it's looking good and it's nice and flat. We got some wiggle room. This one, I cut that one a little long, but that's okay. I'll fold it down in here somehow. But other than that, man, it looks good. I think it looks great. And what I'm going to try to do is to go back and find some previous photos that I took so you can see the differences in the before and after. So let's go ahead and see how the rear end looks with it all wired up. All right, the ever-present and helpful Linda is going to go ahead and give us ignition. So give us one click, Linda. So we got the Fender Tip running light coming on when it should. All right, go ahead and give it another switch. Now we've got our running lights here and there. All right, let's have a brake. Very good. All right, give us a right turn signal. All right, give us a left turn signal. Very good. Well, there it is. This was video 7.5. Real quick, don't forget to check out the Facebook page, getting some action over there. It's been a learning process for me, as I've mentioned all along. I don't like doing electrical work, but I will tell you that I've learned some stuff along the way. So where do we go from here? We still have to run the wires out of the rear loom to the control module, to the coil, to the neutral safety switch, to the ignition module, to the rear brake switch. It might be a segment of the transmission install, of the ignition system install, because they're going to come at various stages. The theory is next is we're going to get the oil pan back, put that on the bike. We're going to put the swing arm in the rear, and we're going to have to put new swing arm bearings into the swing arm. They got to be pressed in or hammered in. We're going to hammer them in. I'm going to show you a technique for how to do that. So we'll get the swing arm in. get the back end buttoned up. Then as soon as we get the motor, we'll go motor, transmission, our transmission, then the motor, tighten the motor down, tighten the transmission to the motor, tighten, put the inner primary on, then we'll get into that. So as always, I appreciate you sticking around. Be ready for the next video, and the best way to do that is to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up, like the video, check out the advertisements, let them pop. It's not going to be but like 25 seconds of your life, and as I've said before, I'm not making money off this, but it is a little time consuming. So what little bit of money I do make off of the videos goes to buy another piece of chrome or another tool or something useful in the garage, and of course I get to share that with you. So as always, appreciate you coming by the garage. YouTube, ride safe, handle your business, and save some money. And